The Flame and the Flood is a combined roguelike and roguelite survival game developed by the Molasses Flood and published by Curve Games Limited in 2016 and later CG Projekt Red. The team, consisting mostly of Bioshock Infinite alumni, made a game asking the player to take the role of a nameless scout as she tries to survive in a flooded America. Joined by her trusty raft and guided by a mysterious dog, she sets out into the wilds on the hunt for other survivors. A proper entry into the everlasting roguelike versus roguelite debate is beyond the scope of this video, but The Flame and the Flood offers a handy wedge in on the subject at least. Being inspired by Oregon Trail, it stands closest to the roguelike end of the spectrum. Permadeath is the name of the game with build crafting and god runs nowhere to be seen. But what makes the game so interesting is that you have a couple of settings that swerve it closer to being a roguelite instead. A standard playthrough is about 5 to 6 hours, which makes permadeath very unappealing. To ease players into the experience, Traveller difficulty offers checkpoints at the start of each region, essentially turning the game into a linear sequence of shorter runs with inherited resources. It's a structure somewhat shared with Prey Mooncrash and one I found worth more experimentation in future games of this ilk. By playing on Survivalist difficulty, you can eschew this kindness and commit to full permadeath the entire playthrough. But even then, the game still wants to throw you a bone by offering what amounts to a form of meta progression. If the option is active when you drop dead in the wilderness, the limited inventory belonging to your helping hound will be passed on to the next playthrough. Just like how the game begins in a nice bit of gameplay and story integration. This means that you have to organize your stash and strike your preferred balance between short-term and long-term supplies to kickstart your next run when you find yourself at death's door. These options, combined with the unique structure the river provides alongside the survival mechanics, makes for a rather distinct experience compared to other rogue-shaped things out there. But due to how vital knowledge is to progression, that novelty is bound to run out and leave you without that 400-hour money-back feeling once you learn the game's tricks. But as thin as it is, the game's narrative offers enough closure to make the journey feel worthwhile. What few cutscenes are present in The Flame and the Flood all serve as a framework for the story. Your story, that is. The story of how you fell off your raft, rushed to set up camp to dry up and get some rest, woke up in a rainstorm right next to an angry boar who broke your leg, took your revenge on it, and then hobbled away with an abundance of food looking for medical supplies. It's very much a storytelling engine first and foremost, which goes hand in hand with the river itself. Taken as a metaphor for life and the give and take of Mother Nature, the river offers a series of vague choices with good and bad outcomes you have to make before they pass you by. With a bit of experience and preparation, you can make more out of each location you choose to visit, but you are still forced to give something up eventually. Ever moving forward, you either get to where you want to be or die trying. It's a bittersweet setup, but given the flood that brought society to an end, it kind of has to be. For as lonely as the journey can be, you aren't the only person out there. Very rarely will you run into other survivors who offer helpful advice and a few supplies to keep you going, with details on the collapse being scant. I think the term vibe piece is apt here, as the game is really not concerned with telling you an epic tale of tragedy and loss. Things are the way they are, and you can fight against this broken world by learning its rules and never giving up. There is something uplifting about that, which is more than I can say about the odd quilts you can find. These quilts are sewn with the tales of how a bunch of people reacted to the flood, and most of them are just these stubborn caricatures who basically let themselves die because they were dumb. 6 of the 10 follow this pattern, and I do wonder if we're meant to pity them or simply laugh at them. One of the stories bucks the trend a bit, since it depicts a river capitalist who had the amazing revelation that dumping waste into the river was bad and that he should go down with the planet as penance. But the 2 women depicted on the quilts get the tragic treatment and prove a lot more resonant than the men ever could. The last quilt speaks directly to the scout and is a nice bit of tertiary human connection, but I find it difficult to accept the final sentiment of everyone's story deserving to be told when it's this cartoonish. In a game where an almost literal witch proves to be more down to earth, I have to ask if the writer on staff had an axe to grind writing this or if they didn't think things through all the way. In either case, the quilts don't add much, so let's talk about the ending instead. The game is roughly divided into 3 acts, with the first having you track down a relay in order to listen to a message on the dog's radio. The second act ends with you following the message to Angel Yards, one of the launch sites for the rockets people use to escape the planet with. After the only forced encounter in the game against a bear, you find a note directing you south towards something called the Kingdom. The man helping you get back out on the water calls it a tall tale, but the scout has faith in this dream place and sets off into Act 3. Here, things are decidedly different as the remaining regions are a wasteland with very few resources. But assuming you have learned the game in time and prepared enough food, clothing and raft upgrades, it's best to simply coast along the river, which really helps with the pacing as you get to the end. Said ending is the game's highlight as you go out to sea for an extended sequence where the soundtrack carries you through a storm. It goes on long enough to instill you with a sense of doubt before salvation makes itself known as the sun greets you once again. Your arrival in the kingdom is a simple but effective series of events showing the heartwarming effort that has gone into building a new home for people out here. Being met with more of the dogs the residents have been training in order to find people, and then seeing that your dog was presumed lost but still made it back is very triumphant. And just as you're finished gawking at your wonderful new home, the game ends as the residents greet you and ask you what you've seen on your way there. For as weak as the writing feels throughout, not really saying anything about anything, this ending manages a lot on its own, making this one of the more uplifting post-apocalyptic stories I can think of. The kingdom existing is one thing, but the fact that its creators want to share it with more people instills you with a good kind of vibes that are borderline unheard of for anything with these sorts of themes. It's more than enough to make the struggle there worth it. The gameplay is divided into two distinct parts that feed into each other. First, you need to ride the raft along the river, taking in the vibes and making sure not to crash into too much debris as you decide where to go, using whichever location markers pop up as your guidance. As you'll soon learn, these markers tell you what resources are likely to be present in each area, which allows you to prioritize according to your needs. Once you reach a place to dock, the game switches to being on foot, at which point you and your dog set off to raid the place for anything that can upgrade the raft and help keep your survival meters up. Starvation, dehydration, cold and exhaustion are your everlasting enemies for the adventure, all of which can be kept at bay in a variety of ways. If you're playing on the Traveller difficulty, then your survival meters are barely an issue, whereas on Survivalist they quickly send you to the grave. To help you deal with these problems as you learn how to navigate the game, the tutorial provides a quest asking you to create your first two tools, a stone knife and a stone hammer. The remaining quests are random, challenging you to engage with a mechanic, explore a location, eat something weird, or cure a certain ailment. The tools are the equivalent of your tech tree, as they do not take up space, last for an absurd amount of uses, and unlock new crafting recipes. For everything else, as soon as you have the material, the recipe can be used. As you can imagine, there's a lot of crafting to be done, which in turn means inventory management is basically the core mechanic. Depending on who you are, this can be deeply frustrating or very engaging. No matter your disposition though, getting more inventory space is key to building up a stash of supplies, and that means hunting rabbits for their pelts to make pouches. This is especially important on Survivalist, which starts you out with even less space. Once you're maxed out, you are then free to pursue a multitude of raft upgrades, including more inventory space, clothing upgrades, and recipes for everlasting food. Generally speaking, the crafting is structured in such a way as to punish you for making mistakes by demanding material you use for permanent upgrades in return. Lacerations are best treated with bandages, but a stitching kit will do in a pinch. Lumber combined with nuts and bolts is used for upgrading the raft, but can also be used to make a portable emergency fire and hull integrity patches. Saplings are a core ingredient in traps, but are also used to make splints to cure broken bones. For as anxiety-inducing as this can be starting out, you eventually realize that the game isn't as harsh as it first appears. Stupidity is the real killer in the wilds, and in a very scout-like fashion, simply respecting the danger of something you can't handle is better than blindly rushing in with half a plan. And even if you do, a lot of ailments simply make your meters tick faster before going away, though some naturally make you drop dead before long. Since the game doesn't toss many curveballs at you and lets you build both a shelter and a stove on the raft, it does make it boring at some point though. Especially if you play in endless mode, which lets you max out on upgrades about as fast as a normal campaign and then reap the benefits forever. But I respect the semi-realistic approach here, as by playing smart and preparing in advance, you'll survive just fine. The game randomly deciding to screw you over more to increase the challenge would make it more exciting, but I think there is merit in presenting a series of systems for the player to master in the time it takes to complete a campaign. For the endgame, they do at the very least minimize your access to many plants and downright require you to go hunting if your food stash is too small. Something which can prove to be a costly learning experience. While there are achievements for not hurting animals, the survival loop is very much designed around hunting them for food and clothing. Doing so doesn't really feel like a normal combat system though, which again lends the game this pseudo-realistic angle that makes it stand out. The only head scratcher is that your canine companion doesn't interact with other animals at all beyond barking at them, not even to warn you. I think this was a smart concession to keep things simple and focused on you needing to spend precious resources to hunt, but it is odd that you can't even give them a treat for an item finding buff or something. Anyway, by the time an encounter has begun against anything other than a bundle of rabbits, you have almost lost it already if you haven't set down traps beforehand. They take time to craft and deploy, so if you don't have enough resources back in the safety of the dock, the entire area is basically forfeit. If there is something vital there, you can burn a precious sapling to keep boars and wolves at bay, but it's not a good long-term solution. Be prepared is your motto, but even then you have to be careful about what traps you make and how you place them so as to not waste saplings. Rabbits are a vital resource since the skin can also be used to make leather kits, which is key to late game clothing. Of course, to even get those kinds of pelts, you need to learn how to hunt bigger game. A boar is easy enough to kite around while looting, even with the pitiful amount of stamina the scout has. But they are still fast enough to make it almost impossible to set up a spike trap while they have aggro on you. As such, they make for a hardy beginner challenge. Wolves are your true enemies though, as they are vicious and often come in packs that can simply appear if you're unlucky. That leaves little time to set up a trap, but you can distract them with a live rabbit caught using a box trap. This is a terrible waste of resources, and I have to question why it's even included. Poisoned meat, while using a somewhat rare plant, lasts forever and still gets you fresh meat back once the wolf kicks the bucket. The gas bomb elicits similar questions since it consumes a precious water container and is a pretty janky way of hunting. A more dependable method is to sick animals against each other, as snakes are free traps, wolves and boars often end up in stalemates, and bears will murder anything within range of their cave. This can net you free stuff, or at the very least serve as a handy distraction. Taking it all together, there's an engaging amount of wiggle room as you contemplate building expensive traps, using animals against each other, or simply evade them for a bit to grab what you can, broken bones or open wounds be damned. Though weirdly enough, for as torn up as you can get by animals, your clothing does not have durability, which I feel is a lost opportunity. Same for the day-night cycle, which barely has an impact on gameplay. The game gets colder as you go along, but keeping up with the temperature curve isn't very difficult and eventually becomes a non-issue, even at night. If your clothing could be ripped apart, then pelts wouldn't be pointless in the late game and the low temperature threat would be much more severe than it currently is. That would help maintain the challenge of item management, but not even the game's rare animals can stop hunting from becoming rote at some point. Nothing exemplifies this more than hunting bears, which is so dangerous that you almost have to follow the optimal strategy of an arrow followed by 3 spike traps. Doing it the other way is asking for a mauling, as the bow has a pathetic range and a long draw time, putting it in line with the design philosophy of the traps. You must use your brain to beat these beasts, and pulling it off the first few times feels great, especially as you set off victorious in the raft and trigger another piece of the soundtrack as you make your way down the river. Despite being in a genre I have effectively zero understanding of, Chuck Ragan's take on country music speaks for the very soul of The Flame in the Flood, starting with the reverence the acoustic guitar gets in the sound mixing. Add his vocals to the mix, and it's difficult not to get swept up in the pleasant vibes.
These roads never end till they reach the water. Lend an ear now, sons and daughters. When you find your way, drift and pull your stay. Take the lesson away.
It's not a huge soundtrack, but it covers a fair amount of the emotional spectrum, which really hits when the stars align and you get a song that matches the mood of what you're going through. Helping things further is the unique art style which was cooked up by none other than Scott Sinclair. him being the core reason why Bioshock Infinite looks so good despite all of its development troubles. While being almost as colorful, I think The Flame and the Flood looks the best during nighttime. The environments are filled with strong sources of light and are sometimes accentuated by leaves blowing in the wind. Combined with strong shadows and the cell shading, and you get a fully realized world that's really pleasant to adventure across. When it comes to indie games, and AA games to a lesser extent, my eternal worry is that the scope won't be enough to fulfill the game's potential. Now obviously, every game lost something during development, but there is this invisible line a game has to pass before I feel convinced its core ideas have been explored enough. The Flame and the Flood passes that line, as it provides a focused and comfy experience that's as long as the mechanics can support, with only some minor bugs and a couple of odd decisions keeping it down. It won't be for everyone, especially not the roguelite freaks out there wanting hundreds of hours out of $15 a video game. But for those seeking to poke at the ideas behind roguelikes in a simple way, or just want a good palate cleanser, I'd say it's worth a try, if only for the immaculate vibes. If you want to see more of said vibes, I do have a fully featured Let's Play of the game available on my other channel, as linked below. I spent my time with the game telling camping stories and getting besieged by wildlife, which made for a fun playthrough. Ah, pig! No, no, no! If you have some good camping stories of your own, or some strong opinions on the roguelike versus roguelite debate, feel free to share them in the comments. Thank you for watching, and please make sure you're subscribed in time for the next episode. Whatever it might be.